I think everybody knows this crazy stuff on a certain level.
Yeah.
Then we're all striving to understand it on a certain level. Some of us have a little bit more experience than others. Some don't want to go down that rabbit hole because it seems too much like death,
Yeah.
freaks people out, or will make you stand out and be a little too weird in your social circles. But maybe it's because my social circles have always been consciousness researchers, damn psychologists, psychics, gurus. I've been with them all. Uh, It's not a weird conversation to me. It's a very human conversation.
Welcome, Playmates. Welcome to another Psychonauts podcast. I've got a really, really special treat for you today. A very, very good friend of mine. His name's Mark Certo. This guy has been in my life for almost 15 years or so, at
We're
least.
old friends, yeah.
We're old friends. And when I first started waking up and going through all of the insanity of what a waking up is, Mark was the guy who kind of held my hand through it and just guided me and got me to look at things rationally and look at things in all kinds of different ways, and really, really helped bring me through to a new paradigm in my life and a new way of living. That's totally changed my life in many, many ways. And aside from that, he's a genius when it comes to audio recording, and particularly with binaural beats. Mark was the chief engineer over at the Monroe Institute, working with famous Bob Monroe on consciousness studies, using binaural beats and frequencies and cymatics and all kinds of things to study consciousness and
Hmm.
see maybe how you can manipulate consciousness, maybe too, a little bit.
Assist. Yeah.
Achieve altered states of consciousness at
Hmm.
least. And then you left in 2001 to
Hmm.
start your own thing,
Hmm.
continuing your research in altered states and consciousness, and for the purposes of integration, which he does through a meditation program called the Triad Mind, which
That
is
is correct.
awesome, by the way. I
Thank
mean,
you.
yeah, really, really awesome. So, like next level stuff to the Phi Tribe stuff, what we're doing over at Phi Tribe, this is like the next level of escaping the body and getting into all kinds of crazy states of being, right?
Crazy states of being, and more importantly, integrating the information that you get out there.
That's awesome.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, it's important because otherwise you just kind of float.
Yeah, it's a lot to integrate, isn't it?
It is a lot to
Yeah.
integrate.
It's like suddenly you go from a very narrow way of looking at the world into this very wide way of looking at the world. And all of this out here in the periphery is stuff you'd never believed in. And all of a
Hmm.
sudden it's become real, and you have to find a way to integrate that into your life.
And therein lies the most grounded meaning for for the words or the phrase expanded state of consciousness.
Yeah, absolutely. So, for those of you who are not familiar, the
Excuse
Monroe
me.
Institute is a very, very famous institute for studying consciousness
Hmm.
and studying different forms of getting in touch with altered states of consciousness. And there's a lot of ties with the CIA, and this is why this has become a very, very trending topic now. Some CIA documents got released about some of the stuff you're doing over there. And I was going to tell you, you pop up in my conspiracy feeds every now and then. I watch a conspiracy video, and then I see your face pop up talking about this stuff,
You
and it's
told me that, and I really want to know all about that because I don't, I don't have a
I'm
YouTube
like, oh my God,
feed
there's
to,
Mark. He's at
right.
the center of a conspiracy. It's a
The next, I get emails all the time or Facebook messages saying, so are you a member of the Illuminati?
So a lot of the stuff that I was seeing you associated with was the remote viewing and how the Monroe Institute was involved with some of the remote viewing stuff.
Mhm.
But I don't want to jump too far ahead of it. We'll kind of get into
Okay,
there,
we'll
nice,
take our
nice
time.
and easy. And so I've got the CIA documents. Mark was kind enough to bring them over to me. So here's the actual documents in front of me. But we're just going to tell the story through Mark's eyes and get a sense of how deep this rabbit hole goes.
Well, to be perfectly honest, I joined the lab team at the Monroe Institute in '88. So all of the stuff that's in that document now actually took place prior to my
Okay,
being there. And at the time, it was still classified.
gotcha.
The Stargate program, which was the remote viewing program, was the first thing to be declassified. This document here came out in, like, I don't know, 2010, 2012, and is just held people are very interested.
Yeah, definitely.
Excuse me. So when I got there, it was still pretty hush hush, but the people that were involved in the lab were part of the whole Stargate program. They were in the military, one of which is Joe McMonagle, who's been a psychic remote viewer for the better part of 40 years now, 50 years maybe. And of all of them, and I've met quite a few of them, Joe is one of the more talented ones. He's, if you don't know what remote viewing is or what the Stargate program is, and I'm talking to your audience here, so I'm going to look in the camera. It's basically the ability, it was a response to the Cold War. A fella by the name of Uri Geller and several others were involved in some form of cross intelligence, we'll say, between the Russians and the United States at the time. And it was revealed to the DIA that there were people in the Soviet Union who were being trained as psychic spies. So this idea of psychic spies was of interest.
Sure,
It's like,
yeah.
how do you, what are the potentials here?
It's a good movie anyway.
Yeah, exactly. And they did you see this
Yeah, that
film,
was great. The
Men Who
Men Who
Stare
Stare
at
at
Gold?
Goats.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
well yeah, that was one, but there was another movie with George Clooney in it called Men Who Stare at
Yeah,
Goats.
that's what I was talking
Oh,
about. Yeah,
okay.
yeah,
I
yeah.
thought you were talking about the Russell Targ film, the Psychic Spies. Anyway, long story longer, this was a tie-in between some psi research that was being done at Stanford Research Institute, and where they were doing psychic, or just basically psi research, trying to figure out what the mechanisms are that live behind psychic phenomenon. I'm not necessarily talking about spoon bending. I'm talking about people who can pick up psychic information from another person or information from another person psychically. So Bob Monroe had his out of body experiences in the late 50s, early 60s, and he started to look for some form of validation from people who were in the scientific community about what was going on for him, because this, was not part of his longing. He didn't want to have an out of body experience, he was just spontaneously having them. And he wanted to make sure he wasn't going crazy. And this story is well known if you've ever read Journeys Out of the Body, which was basically a journal that he kept about his out of body experiences at the behest of Charles Tart, who was one of the founders, if not the founder, of depth psychology, brilliant psychologist, who was involved in psi research. Bob got in touch with folks at the Menninger Foundation, Elmer and Alice Green, who were also doing psi research. They got Bob involved with SRI. SRI was already involved in the psychic spy thing through the remote viewing program. So before you knew it, Bob Monroe was found himself in this circle, of psi researchers and psi researchers who were involved with the military.
Wow.
Right. So,
Yeah.
Bob was a patriot. He was probably in his 60s by that point in time. And, he said, if there's something that I can do to be of help in this, I'm down with it. Let's give those Russians a run for their money, so to speak. And Baba at the time had developed a technique of using binaural beats, which, became hemisync. You called me the OG. Bob Monroe was the OG of, binaural beats. He did the research. He found the work that Gerald Oster had done. That goes back to another Willem Dove, I think, was the first one to understand that there was some form of entrainment that went on between clicks or pulses and sound. Gerald Oster could see that. He was an audiologist. He saw brain waves change as a result of specific clicks and pulses, and the brain would actually entrain. So Bob, clicks and pulses are annoying, if they're just raw, who wants to
Yeah.
listen to this all day long? They
Sure.
used to use a metronome for
Yeah.
that sort of
Right.
thing to induce altered states. Bob decided that it was possible to use sine waves, which were much more pleasing, and create the binaural beats that we know today. It was a very simplistic method in the beginning, but it attracted the attention of those who were involved in the SRI CIA program. They wanted to know, could we use these binaural beats to help people who were involved in the Stargate program become more proficient and get an edge up on the Soviets? Could we teach them to go out of their bodies like what Bob Monroe was doing to become more proficient in data gathering? Because at the time they were using map coordinates to figure out what was going on, you know. So that's basically the generic history. By the time I got there, all of that was done, but it was in this weird place between, it was still classified information, and they couldn't really talk about what was going on. But Bob, being that I was his recording engineer, was still very much interested in trying to solve this mystery because there are a lot of them. So he had to tell me certain things, but he couldn't tell me everything,
Sure.
you
I
know.
gotcha, because it's classified.
Right. And
Yeah.
the other guys who were in the lab who were involved, not Joe McMoneagle, but Skip Atwater, who was part of the Stargate program, actually one of the commanders, training, they could tell me certain things about what they were looking for because I was the guy applying this data and creating the recordings, but they couldn't tell me everything,
Mm.
And the evolution of hemisync was all predicated on so much of this type of material from Bob's standpoint. This is the direction he wanted to go in. And we can talk about why that is, because it has to do with sympathetic resonance and consciousness and expanded consciousness and psi research and all the things that, you and I talk about all the
Sure.
time. But I had to piece a lot of these things together. So when this document came out, I went, oh, I get it. I see what we were doing. I get why. Oh, really? Why didn't you just say that? I mean, I'm having this conversation.
So behind the black marker, you know what it says, basically.
There are no black markers in these documents, right? Yeah. But yeah,
Yeah.
all the redacted stuff
Yeah.
is no longer redacted because it's considered, fringy stuff that the military got involved in and is not really relevant to today. Ironically, people like Joe McMoneagle are still quite active as remote viewers,
Yeah.
working for various agencies, some of which are probably governmental at this point. But I don't want to speak for Joe. I don't know what he's doing these days.
No, it's very, very cool. He was just on Sean Ryan's show, and it was just fascinating how far deep he was going. It was like a 6-hour interview, and it was
He's an amazing
really, really
guy.
something.
Yeah,
His stories are incredible.
Right,
Really, really
right.
incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, just given if I gave you a set of map coordinates, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know map coordinates. Do you know map coordinates?
No, not
Yeah,
really.
exactly.
No.
That's
Yeah.
the stuff that your GPS uses to figure out where you are
Sure.
and where you're going, right? They're
Yeah.
map coordinates. Well, back in the 70s and early 80s, long before there were GPSs, they would give you these map coordinates to these psychics and say, tell me what's going on here at, 8 degrees north by northwest, 3 minutes 12 seconds, by something else. And I'm like, I don't know math, dude. You're freaking me out. And the psychics are supposed to close their eyes and begin the process of what they call scientific remote viewing, which is very different from a lot of psychic phenomena in that there's a rigid protocol for making sure that you don't interpret it too quickly, because that's part of the problem. A lot of psychics,
They see something and then that's it.
I see,
Okay,
exactly.
gotcha.
I see your dead grandfather is hanging out with you, and he's trying to. How do we know? Could be projection, it could be transference, it could be so many things.
Sure.
The scientific remote viewing protocol, and I'm not a remote viewer, so I can't speak really intelligently on it, but from what I understand, is a very rigid protocol where they take it step by step by step. Shapes are not interpreted quickly. So a remote viewer might look at those map coordinates and go, yeah, I kind of see wavy lines.
Mm.
And the monitor would say, step back a little bit from it. Is there depth?
I see.
Look around. See what you're seeing.
Kind of leading him through his
Right,
vision.
but slowly and methodically so that the interpretation doesn't get confused and the data stays pure.
Gotcha. That
And
makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
And theoretically, those things take place in some form of altered state of consciousness, which is where Charlie Tart came in. He wrote the de facto textbook on altered states of consciousness with regards to depth psychology, aptly named Altered State of Consciousness. Great read for anybody who's interested. Anyway, Charlie would look at this and try to figure out what state of consciousness are these people truly in. Because, I mean, when we talk about altered states of consciousness, what are we really talking about? You have to first define what is consciousness in order to figure out what it is in its pure state. And then, then you're looking at this whole spectrum of potential altered, quote unquote, states of consciousness.
Yeah.
So these psychics are supposed to be in an altered state of consciousness. But, I've had conversations with Charlie, and he was describing working with Ingo Swann, who was probably the godfather of remote viewing. He's an excellent viewer. And he said, Ingo would sit there and he'd be drawing out and talking to you, drawing out what he's seeing in his mind's eye with his eyes completely open, talking to you, smoking a cigar. He said, if that's an altered state of consciousness, I don't know what is.
Yeah.
And
a few beers too, I heard. Too.
Right.
He would...
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, it makes you wonder how important altered states are to this. Mm-hmm. But in the cases of people like Joe McMoneagle, for instance, Joe found Bob Monroe's Focus 15, I believe, to be among the more helpful states of consciousness, because the implications of Focus 15 is you're in a state where time no longer exists.
Okay.
For the individual having the experience. And I think, and I could verify this by saying that most people have the same type of experience where there's a nothingness. And once you get to that state of nothingness, you're kind of out of the picture of projecting into the nothingness. There's a point of, I won't say ego detachment necessarily, but more oriented towards at least a relaxation or a separation. And we can talk about
eyes
the power
open,
of
or
binaural.
eyes closed, is kind of sinking into the blackness until it becomes
Right,
until the void
right.
becomes something. I guess.
Sure,
right,
exactly.
Yeah. Slipping into imagination.
Right. So that's the background, and I entered into the picture in '88, and again, there's only so much they could talk about.
Of
but
course.
By the time this document came out, I was
You've pretty
laughing.
You've pretty much figured
Yeah,
it all
I
out.
was like connecting the dots and going, "Oh God, why didn't you just say that?" We could have gotten a lot further with that. If you had said something.
It's more fun when it's hush hush.
Yeah, right. Well, all of this came out long after Bob passed too, and Lori too. So by the time I was gone, this document came out.
So, tell me about altered states of consciousness and out-of-body experience. I know it's hard to identify what it is without first identifying what consciousness is, which my audience on this show are very familiar with. We talk about consciousness quite often, how consciousness is not necessarily confined to the human skull. It is an interaction between what is perceivably out here and what is taking place in here. Mm-hmm. So what can you tell me about what you've discovered about out-of-body experiences using altered states of consciousness?
Well, again, you'd have to start at the baseline of discussing what is consciousness. Now, I have a podcast called Expanding on Consciousness, which I do for Monroe. I talk to people involved in all sorts of academic research all the time, and who come up with amazing findings about, I don't know, everything from the potential of consciousness being at a vortex point within the microtubules in the DNA or cells of the brain, to people who've researched near-death experiences and out-of-body experiences, to people who are studying plants who can prove that plants are sentient beings who make decisions. In every one of those interviews, I ask one simple question, usually towards the end of the interview, which is, okay, you've been studying this for 40 years, from your perspective, what is consciousness? And the wisest ones will always answer accurately. They will say, I have no idea. So in other words, you're telling me for the past 40 years, you've been studying something that you have no idea of what you're really looking at. Consciousness is still a mystery from my personal perspective. However, there's a couple of things that I know that I can say about it with a degree of certainty. One of which, there's a dual model of consciousness, which makes sense to me. One is that what I'll refer to as the Western model. And in that model, consciousness is synonymous with awareness. It's binary. You're either conscious or unconscious, right? Altered
Hmm.
states of consciousness, scientifically, we really don't know what we're talking about
Sure.
yet. There's some correlations, but still a lot more mystery. But the best that can be said about it is that it might be considered a compendium of sensory input, that which our senses can pick up, physical senses, which stimulate brainwaves, cortical stimulation, and bounce up against what lives in memory, things that we have filed. So the sound of my voice, if I
Hmm.
wasn't in this room and you heard a recording, you'd say, I know that voice. It's Mark Certo's voice, right?
Sure.
Why? Because you're hearing that recording, right?
Comparing against the memory
And
in the
comparing,
brain,
exactly.
and then make a comparison contrast,
Right.
and then I create the new reality in front of me,
Right.
which is what we talk about all the time on this show. So,
Right. And that is, as far as anybody can tell, a function of brains, of neurology and biology. The Eastern model is very different. The Eastern model of consciousness says that consciousness is actually fundamental, meaning that it is everywhere. Everything and everyone and every physical, non physical thing is consciousness, perhaps one consciousness, pretending that it's not itself in
pretending,
some kind of way.
pretending to be separate.
Right. And that's a very mystical perspective. So when you get into things like the out of body experience, you are separating your personal sense of consciousness, more of the Western understanding, and integrating or interfacing or interrelating with that larger field
Hmm.
of consciousness. When you look at it from that perspective, you start thinking about consciousness as one word. I started thinking about consciousness in one word: information
Mm.
flow. Okay.
Information flow.
Right.
Yeah, it makes sense.
I mean, basically everything coming out from, the outside to my inside world through that process I was describing before helps me make sense of the world around me.
Sure. Sure. You can even say that it's all one thing, and it's all consciousness. But what is perceived as outside consciousness is consciousness I haven't processed yet before I've integrated it to my inner consciousness. Like that.
Sure, and
That's the
that brings
division.
about various consciousness phenomenon like what's the word for it? Cognitive dissonance,
Sure.
where what I'm hearing, what I'm seeing is not living in my memory bank.
Mm.
Neither does it match anything close to my memory bank information, data that's already been captured. So how do I make sense of this? Right?
Yeah.
It seems weird.
Hmm.
But the information flow between that which is non physical in this sea in which we swim of consciousness and our internal processing of it seem to be some form of polarity or dyadic conversation, and is very much vibrational, metaphysical, meaning more than physical, information based, and somehow interactive, creating our reality. Now, that is way too large a stretch for the Western consciousness model.
Sure.
But the more that Western scientists pull this idea together and start looking and actually doing the research, now I'm not just talking about psi research like Roger Nelson
Yeah. Great. We
doing
talk
the
about him a lot.
Global
Yeah.
Consciousness Project.
Yeah.
For those of you who are unaware of it,
Hmm.
basically Roger's been setting up these random number generators for a very long time. They're all across the globe. And when something that the world consciousness is paying attention to, like say the attacks on 9/11 or the attacks on October 7th in Israel, people are paying attention. There's a spike in the correlation of all these random number generators coming together. There's something about human consciousness which is affecting random systems.
Hmm.
That is part of what's going on in the CIA document. How to create order out of chaos. Human consciousness is uniquely wired to do that. We've been doing that forever. And we're like sense-making machines, aren't we?
So is the group consciousness affecting the projected reality, or is it actually changing reality?
We don't know for certain. It seems to be that reality is stable and agreed upon.
Mm-hmm.
This microphone exists, yes?
Yes.
Uh,
For us here now.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. You and
Sure.
I exist.
Yes.
We exist as separate beings, but there's something that is not quite absolute about that.
Mm-hmm.
One, we know that, these bodies and everything that makes up physical reality is actually atomic at an atomic level, very small particles that are vibrating and agreeing to some form of cohesion.
Mm-hmm.
That cohesion can fall apart pretty easily by, if I took this microphone and physically began to twist it and smash it, it would change shape, right?
Yeah.
One might consider that to be an example of the quantum potential, but what this research seems to be implying, and I'm not just talking about psi research, I'm talking about quantum theory, M theory, string theory. These things are talking about consciousness and the interrelationship between consciousness and matter as being something that has potential to become something other than through this mechanism of consciousness. So, in other words, there may be some way that I can focus on this and shift it rather than physically manipulate it to do that. And that's the root of the research going on with things like, psychic phenomenon, with psychic healing, anything. If it has the word psychic or PSI science, psi, it has to do with the mind body, mind matter connection. And the root of that may be in terms of string theory and M theory, vibration, cymatics, all the things that you're talking about on the Phi Tribe channel.
Gotcha.
And yeah, your basic interests. But you know for a fact that vibration affects physiology.
Absolutely.
I mean, you make music in EDM at specific, beats per minute, probably with very, very intentional about key structures and melodic structures, knowing there'll be a predictable outcome,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
As a composer.
I would say that any DJ knows that too. You play a random sampling of songs, and there are some songs people are reacting to, and it's not necessarily
Right.
just because it's the popular song. It's just some songs get that reaction. What is that?
Exactly.
What is
What
that?
is
What is
that?
that thing? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And yet it can be known
Mm-hmm.
or intuited by a composer because you're talking about something that has a random flux of potential, but is right now in a state of chaos. Take a hit song, for instance. I believe that what I've written may be a hit, right? You listen to it for the first time and you agree. Now we've got an agreement going on here.
Sure.
Play it for a few more people and they say, wow, this is really, this does something to me. So my intention as a composer, right, a
Yeah.
solo intention is manifested into something that can be experienced by others, which through sympathetic resonance has an entrainment to it. That grows exponentially with every group of people who hear the same song. Before you know it, it's a hit.
Each person's processing of it and influences the
Adds to,
next,
right.
kind of like a hundredth monkey,
Exactly.
sort of thing like that.
Exactly. And Rupert Sheldrake talks a lot
Yeah.
about that, extracting information. If you listen to my interview with him, his whole theory is that this information lives in this perhaps electromagnetic field. It can be accessed by all beings who resonate with it in some kind of way where they can switch their minds, their personal sense of consciousness to pick up the information on that channel.
This is the morphogenic resonance?
Yes.
Right, right on.
The morphic field. Right?
What exactly is that? Do we know? I mean, do we know what influences it, or?
Sheldrake consciousness, but it may also be electromagnetic.
Yeah.
So there's something that can be measured, but again, this type of research, especially in academic circles, the people who believe consciousness equals awareness, which is equivalent to on, off. That's
Sure.
it. It's totally binary.
Yeah.
Or at best, we can talk about it in terms of it being a compendium of, sensory input and cortical stimulation and memory, in which case, it's very personal that way. It's very observable that way. I mean, even when people die, they used to measure heart rate, right? Well, the heart stopped. Okay, the guy's dead.
dead.
No, now it's brain waves.
The brain, right? And we're going to find out later. It's
Right,
the
right.
cells are still alive.
Right,
We buried
exactly.
you alive.
Right. And there's still a lot of mystery here.
Sure.
So again, the wiser ones that I interview, the people like myself who've been involved in this since God was a child, we still don't know quite what it is we're looking at. The thing is that we find cool is that even though we don't know the full mechanisms, there are ways for us to test our theories. And even more importantly, something magical is occurring when we do things that aid others. You teach others to do this. Something magical occurs within the life of the individual. That is a form of self-realization, which leads to, if properly integrated, self-actualization. So now we're into a whole different field of study that includes, it's a
Sure.
psychospiritual dynamic.
So maybe you can define the difference between, you said, consciousness and awareness, and the difference between consciousness and self-awareness.
I'm not sure that I can talk about it from personal experience. When I'm in a form of deep meditation, I'm not aware of my body at all. Some people might call that an out-of-body experience, because they're so glued to the idea that in order to have any experience, you have to have a body.
Mm-hmm.
But when my body is in a state of sleep and my awareness is still focused, meaning I didn't lose awareness, I didn't turn off like we do when we cross into stage 3 or stage 4 sleep, right? We're in 3, they now call it. Then I'm still having an experience, but I don't really have a body attached to it, okay? I know that because my body is snoring. And if you've ever had this experience, of hypnagogic journeys, your body is asleep. And
Sure.
my wife was right. I snore. So I hear myself snore, and I kind of giggle. She was right. I'm going to have to tell her, no, maybe I won't. We'll keep that one rolling. So I'm now having an experience. Is that a dream experience? Is it something other? Would be the more appropriate question. The fact that I'm having any experience at all is enough for make me wonder, well, if I am not this body, and my body is not what's important to have an experience with this thing called consciousness, then certainly consciousness, even as it's experienced personally, must be in some kind of way larger than my typical observance or thoughts about it.
Yes.
Right?
I would agree, definitely.
I mean, I'm just trying to take this logically, right?
Yeah.
Now, it could be a dream experience, or it could be something else. Now we'd have to have a long conversation about lucid dreaming, out-of-body experiences
Sure.
as a natural projection, and what are the potential differences there.
Right.
And maybe we'll do that as a sidebar. But to answer your question directly, in my way of thinking, awareness is more of your ability to perceive something, whether through physical sensory input, as we do normally in our waking life, or through other means, which can be psychic input.
Okay.
Consciousness and awareness, in my way of thinking, are not necessarily the same thing. At this point in my work, I tend to think of consciousness as being personally experienced and impersonally experienced through this thing called awareness, if you can maintain awareness
Mm-hmm.
to gain access to these things. And at the same time, beyond my personal experience,
Yes.
I tend to think of it as information flowing. If I keep that at the fore of my thinking, it allows me to get a better sense of what's truly going on with this mystery
Yeah.
and how I use it personally, the it being information.
Interesting.
So my favorite mantra right now is, what am I supposed to do with that information?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. But I'm with you on like the compacting of the information, I guess, is what's creating this richer sense of self. And from my experiences with altered states of consciousness, whether that be through meditation or through psychedelics or whatever my method might be, no matter how deep I go into the void, let's just say, or whatever crazy world or place I'm in, no matter how many layers I strip away from my understanding of what this world is,
Mm-hmm.
I'm always me. There's always a feeling of me,
Yeah.
right? Now I can recognize that there are aspects to the self that have completely stripped away or fallen away.
Right.
But no matter how much I strip away,
There's still a personal sense of
it's
I.
personal.
Right.
It's not like just consciousness that's devoid of who I am.
Right.
It includes me. It transcends, but includes me, as Ken Wilber says.
And that's one of the major pitfalls that I was discussing. A lot of people get into this idea that in order to access the larger consciousness system, the the Eastern model of consciousness, that the ego has to be dissolved, or the bad guy,
Right. Yeah.
somehow, and the protagonist, the antagonist in the story. I take a different viewpoint. I think the ego is necessary somehow to maintain the separation or the illusion of separation, for the purpose of potentially experiencing, for the purpose of something larger than the ego to have an experience at all.
Yes.
It's what the psychologists would call a subject-object split.
It would have to pinch off to be able to observe itself.
Right. You can't look at, you can't, otherwise
I
it's
can't see
one
my
great
face.
big void. Right,
Unless
exactly.
I-
Without a mirror, exactly.
I mean, so yeah.
So then we can get into a long conversation about, what's the need for duality in this dynamic,
Well,
rather than all this talk about non-dualism. Non-dualism may be true, but at its root, it may be the absolute highest truth, the penultimate truth, but dualism is obviously needed.
Of course. I mean, if you're non-dual, there's no experience. You're just
Exactly.
here.
There was
That's
a
it.
time, when
Right.
you were in that non-dual state. Can you remember that?
Yeah. Of
In
course.
this particular lifetime?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, even before you began your meditation practice,
Yeah.
all of us experience this in the womb.
Sure.
You and your mother are absolutely one thing. There's not even a sense of the I at that point,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Everything your mother takes into her system, you're getting a dose of,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
She eats pepperoni
You're
pizza, you're getting some pepperoni pizza, whether you like
Yeah.
it or not.
Yeah. And even after the birth, I think it will continue for several 3
That
years. Maybe.
first separation takes place normally around 2 years old, where this sense of I comes into play and verbalization takes place. Now we can not only talk about I and our needs, mine. I want this,
Sure.
I want that, I don't like that, I like this, our preferences and comparative mind. But we're also able to articulate this inner world and inner experience of an I to another party in this relationship. So that's why I refer to consciousness exploration as a psychospiritual work, because it's not just, I let go of my body and I become one with the light and I return with this as an ascended master. I mean,
No.
anybody who lives in that delusion, enjoy the party, but
Yeah.
you're going to find out a few things along the way if you continue that line of thinking. I don't even know what enlightenment is. I mean, for all of my study and work, I
Oh,
just know, to quote Charlie Tart, I'm not as darkened as I once was, and that's enough.
that's a great way of saying it, isn't
Well,
it?
it's
Yeah.
true.
Yeah.
And again, the wiser consciousness researchers, the ones who take this more seriously, are the ones that I focus on in
Yeah.
terms of my mentorship, and I've had some great mentors. So at this age, I'm trying to be a decent mentor to others who are just coming up and saying, "Wow, I had this kind of awakening, and I don't know what to do with this information." Well, welcome to the club.
Yeah.
Neither do any of
That
us.
that
But
was me. I was having all these crazy ideas and thoughts, and I had no one to talk to. And finally, someone knew you. It was a mutual friend,
yeah,
Jimmy,
right.
knew you and introduced me. And I remember us this meeting. I was like so amazed to finally have someone I could talk crazy shit to. And and you were like, "Oh, okay. Well, let me explain to you this crazy thing you're going through here."
I know the irony there is that I think everybody knows this crazy stuff on a certain level.
Yeah.
Then we're all striving to understand it on a certain level. Some of us have a little bit more experience than others. Some don't want to go down that rabbit hole because it seems too much like death.
Yeah.
Freaks people out or will make you stand out and be a little too weird in your social circles. But maybe it's because my social circles have always been consciousness researchers, damn psychologists, psychics, gurus. I mean, I've been with them all. Uh, It's not a weird conversation to me. It's a very human conversation, and if you can have it in a way that is grounded and compassionate, and that there's some empathy in it, where you actually compassionate meaning, that I understand your suffering because I too have been human and I've suffered, right?
Sure.
And this suffering, it's not horrible suffering. It's more like an itch you can't scratch. I'm trying to
Yes.
figure out,
Frustration. A lot of it is
right,
that,
right. I'm trying to figure out something. So break that down. What is this something that we're trying to figure out? Part of it, in my opinion, is our relationship. It's relational, all right? The other part of it is that it really has to do with the ultimate nature of self, which is why in the Triad Mind program, I describe it as a meditation method using the hypnagogic state to self-realize and self-actualize. Because everything that you are is a product of mind, your mind, and the minds of others who have been feeding your mind through this thing we call relationship, through information, right?
hmm
People set up cultures and mores and rules and regulations on how it is that you should be in this structure that we call a society or a family unit, whatever the society is. And in order to, have friends, because we're very social creatures, we need to be able to speak to one another. But a lot of people spend a lot of time being something they're not, acting as if they are something they are not, in order to appease and please and stay within that societal structure
hmm
because it provides a support network. To be able to speak on these issues is to step outside of that societal structure. We don't talk about that shit. We got it all figured out. We're Protestants, we're Catholics, we're Jews, we're Muslims, we're Buddhists, whatever it is, you're in a tribe.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
it's a tribe of simpatico people who resonate with a specific type of information
Yeah.
because of the way that they have explored consciousness thus far. It's a hero's journey in essence. But when you get to that point of realizing that this is a self creating a self to either, grow as an individual or grow as part of a collective unit, then you could find out, well, okay, that's really part of what this journey is all about, whatever spiritual or psychological work that you're doing, shadow work, whatever it is. You're trying to deconstruct and reconstruct the self. For what purpose? To actualize it, to bring it into the world and be a new person.
Yes.
You're creating a self. And that's really what this whole work is about,
Yeah.
in my opinion. When I say this whole work, I'm talking about the exploration of psi, the exploration, the attempt to try to understand who we are and what we are together and find balance and harmony, perhaps, makes sense.
I say it's
Anyway, I
like
could rattle on.
it's
I
like
want to hear
it's
your
like taming the lion, as I tell my
Yeah,
audience. It's
that's
like
a
taming
good
the
word.
lion. Like, you're not trying to kill this ego, because then you can't function. There's nothing to function. You're just here, right?
Right.
That's it. But to treat the self, the ego, as your instrument through which you're navigating the world, but breaking that down to nothing and then reconstructing it again your way. And it's truly authentic to you.
So, how are you defining the ego?
Just the part of me that that believes it's separate from the whole, right? The
Isn't
part
that
of
interesting, the
yeah,
way you say that? A part of me.
that well, there's awareness, and I can
Uh-huh.
remember that I'm everyone, right?
Right.
But if I'm to let go into the dream and play, I have to temporarily, even if it's to a small degree, forget that we're all one thing. Essentially, forget that it's a dream,
Right.
and pretend, play my part, be an actor on a stage and play my part.
Mm-hmm.
But it's for me, awareness is allowing the ego to get lost in the dream and then catching it and pulling it back. Allowing it to get lost and then I pull it back a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, this is like a balancing act. It's a balancing act of engaging in the world and being a part of the world and pulling it back to the center, which is the acute, very visceral understanding that it's all me. It's all this expression of the self, of the no self, I guess, or of the center of consciousness, whatever you want to call that.
So, what would
Yeah.
you call the essential self then?
The still point is the best. I don't have a word for it. I don't know. You could call it God. You could call it the still point. Call it the Father. I mean, what word do you want to give it?
The essential self?
I think the minute that you give it a word, you've already distorted it. The minute that right, because the word itself is caught in time.
Now you're
Right?
talking about the potential, right? The
Sure.
minute we get verbal about something when we hit age 2, now we're naming things.
Yeah.
And with that vibration of a name comes a container. Interestingly enough, in all of the, what shall I call them? Mystery schools, the arcane mystery schools, Wicca, etc. Spells and incantations are all about naming something, using language, bringing vibration into the world. And that's theoretically has an effect on physical reality. I don't know if that's absolutely true, but I
Really?
do know, yeah, because and we can have a long
Okay.
conversation
Yeah.
about the nature of time, and
Sure.
but I'll finish my thought. I don't know if it's absolutely true, but one thing I do know for certain, when I'm speaking to you or to the audience here, my vocal cords are resonating and reflecting my thought process. Thoughts being very etheric, metaphysical energy, right? They come, go, very transient type of thing. The minute that I bring them through my vocal cords, the molecules that stand between us in the air when we have silence, they're like magnetic particles on tape,
Okay.
right?
They just frozen.
Undisturbed.
Okay, gotcha.
They
Suspended animation, sort
right.
of. Yeah. Okay.
Until the pressure of my vocal cords
Huh.
and my speech disturbs them. That creates a harmonic pattern or signature that can be shown right?
Mm-hmm.
On a spectrum analyzer or through Pro Tools. I know you're a Pro Tools user. You can look at the actual waveform.
Mm-hmm.
That is a harmonic signature of my thoughts being produced through my vocal cords.
And impressing
Right,
upon the molecules of the air.
right, exactly. The same premise as, all of
Yeah.
electronics in recording. That from a detached observer standpoint, scientific standpoint, might mean nothing. If you don't understand the language I'm speaking, all you're seeing are their harmonic imprints, right? And you
Mm-hmm.
can dissect all that mathematically.
Sure.
Well, his
Sure.
fundamental frequency is, say, 450, and he's got a 1K jump here,
Manipulating
right?
it.
And his overtones are here, right? Right.
Sure.
But it's a signature pattern of my voice that would be recognizable to you pursuant to what we were talking about earlier
Sure.
in memory, right? But the information that I'm giving, because you understand the language I'm speaking, bounces up against your memory cortex after it hits your eardrum and goes through your whole auditory cortex, and now it's information, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's an exchange. We call it relationship, we call it consciousness, we call it discussion, conversation. This is something, but it's an energetic pattern at its root. That's all it is. That's all it ever was. We make it into something physical
By
through our
speaking it into
understanding.
existence.
Right.
Hmm.
If I give you a bit of information and it gets into your head and it seems like new information or becomes an aha moment for you or something like that, it completely changes your internal structure. It's not just filed away like, some little AI bit that can be regurgitated later through Chat GPT, right? It is literally something that you are now acting on. You see the world in a different way.
Whether I've subscribed to what you said or not, I've
Exactly.
absorbed it, and I'm taking
Exactly.
it on. Even if I'm
Exactly.
like, oh, this person's an idiot, I'm still
Right.
taking it
Even
on.
if it's
Yeah.
cognitive dissonance and you're not absolutely certain what it was that I
Mm-hmm.
said, nor it just makes no sense to you, at some level, it's already beginning to gestate. So when you refer to these things as a form of psyop,
Mm-hmm.
this information flow, that's
Yeah.
how it happens.
Yeah.
And the result, people's belief structures change and their emotions get flared and they start sharing this information with like-kind individuals who suspect that something is going on that they
Yeah.
don't know is truly going on, and all of a sudden this person comes along and they're regurgitating what I had said, and it goes down the food chain, so to speak. Before
Telephone.
you know it, you've got 10,000 people riding at the Capitol building,
Yeah. Yeah.
waiting for something to happen. It affects physical reality, literally.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one way to think about how information or energetic, this thing called consciousness, comes from an etheric form into a very physical form, all right, through human agency. Interestingly enough, quantum theory is starting to question, well, those thoughts that I was having that eventually became, acoustic energy to electronic energy, or maintain acoustic energy if it went in, and back into neurological energy, which became kinesthetic energy, right?
Yeah.
Where does that original thought come from?
I don't know.
Yeah,
Inspiration, no, but aside from that, imagination, inspiration, really.
right,
And inspiration is to be in spirit. If you
right.
break the word down, the etymology, right?
In various schools of quantum theory, they're saying this information already lives in some place. It's a theoretical space called the Hilbert space. And they refer to it, or at least Federico Fugine, who I did an interview with, refers to it as qualia, which
Mm,
is an old word.
I've heard that.
Qualia might be considered information packets of emotional and rational potential, rational energy.
Hmm.
If you are in resonance with a particular form, it seems to draw in this qualia from this Hilbert space into your personal consciousness. All right? That's one way to think about it. So, this quantum flux and potential with all these packets are living somewhere. But because I am who I am and I vibrate in the way that I do, and I think about things the way that I do, and I, move and have my agency and authority in the world in my particular way of doing so, I have access to all of this qualia. It's attractive to me, even though I'm not even certain that it exists. All right?
Sure.
And it comes to me. And I, being that I have no memory of it, feel it like it's inspiration or my personal imagination. It's like, damn, I come up with some really cool shit. Or, whoa, I'm sitting here doing some whacked out thinking today, Either way, information, inspiration, what was the other word that you used? Information, inspiration, and we blew
Just
it.
being in spirit, imagination,
Imagination, right. Those things, I'm all beginning with this, with the letter I,
I,
brought to
right,
you by
yeah.
the letter I, ego, right? All seem to be somehow connected with our ability to access both personal and impersonal consciousness. It makes for a very interesting conversation when you're talking with a quantum theorist. Tom Campbell, who wrote the trilogy My Big Toe, likes to talk about this dynamic in terms of, and Federico did the same, that there is a larger consciousness system, a you that lives outside of this dimension of 3D plus one, that is running you like you would run an avatar in a video game. So there's a you that lives in this Hilbert space that is controlling Ford, who's doing this, and Mark doing this agency and authority here in this 3D plus one dimension. But it's not true. It's just a story. It's just a video game. At any point, somebody could just turn the bugger off, and
Right. And we have to meet somewhere, so it might as well be whatever this is.
Right. So all of this that we've been discussing so far are functions of consciousness, perhaps the potential of consciousness, and the reality of consciousness. And the truth is, it makes it very difficult to figure out what in the hell we're talking about here, right?
Yeah.
I mean, so what is consciousness? And then how do you apply that to your original? We're still on your first question.
Sure, I get it. Yeah, yeah.
What's an altered state in all of this? It's a phenomenon.
Yeah.
Consciousness is a phenomenon, and it seems to be surrounding information. It seems to be.
Yeah, it seems like there's only mind. There's only mind with the illusion of separation into what we're calling reality.
Mhm.
And we all have, would you say that we all have the ability to tap into this qualia? Or is there some qualia that has frequency, sympathetic resonance with us? So
Great
only
question.
certain people can draw certain qualia. And like, I don't have access to this qualia over here, but I have access to this qualia over here,
Great question.
When I write music, and I get into that flow state, and the music's just coming through.
Yeah.
It's very easy for me to set my ego aside and realize that that is coming from somewhere else. I'm just simply tuning into that station, and somehow I'm picking up that song, because it just feels like it's coming through me, not that I'm the one making it up, so to speak. So that
flow,
separation,
right?
that feeling of a separation, that it isn't me, but somehow I'm tuning into the station. It just becomes very, very, very self-evident.
So I think that's correct. My personal experience. Now you've written books too, right?
Same thing.
And same feeling.
Same with that,
right?
yeah.
There is a difference, however, between the flow and that feeling of flow when you're creating something, whether it be a book or a piece of music, and then switching out of that flow state and into a more myopically focused state to make it cohesive and condition it in such a way that it's translatable to another human being,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
I mean, think about how many times you edited your book,
Oh my God. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
In order to make it readable, understandable, because in the moment you were like, it's like channeling,
It is like
right?
channeling.
Yeah,
Yes.
well, it is channeling.
Yeah.
You're literally
Yeah.
setting yourself into a channel of this particular variety of qualia, we'll call it. But in order for it to be cohesive and transmittable so that it can become a stronger reality, a la the hit record,
Sure.
vibrational growth that we
Yeah.
talked about, or the cohesion of, say, a religion or a philosophy or, a political stance, it doesn't matter, right? Whatever the idea is, in order for it to take hold and resonate, there has to be a cohesion that is contained by the author. So now you're literally stepping into a whole different mode, right?
Mm-hmm.
And trying to understand, who is my audience? First of all, does this make sense to me, right? As I'm reading back at it or I'm listening to it, do I groove with it, right? If it's a piece of music. Then you're starting to think one level backwards. You're starting to observe even more, right? Putting on a totally different aspect and saying, well, as a producer of EDM, I know that this formula works. So the inspiration may not have had the same feeling as my usual formula, but the formula somehow helps to uh, formulate,
Mm.
right?
Yes.
Create a form, one that is already in the zeitgeist of the popular music field. Same with books, same with ideas. I can talk about, fantastic ideas that come to me if I'm resonating with the qualia and the dimension of Nod. But if I start speaking about the zeit of the dimension of Nod and you're going to drool, you're
Sure.
not going to know what the hell I'm talking about, right?
It wasn't meant for you.
Right. There's no resonance there because there's cognitive dissonance jumps in. So what creative people tend to do really well, who are successful, are the ones who can put this into a form that makes sense and builds upon the foundation of what went before and take it just a couple of notches up. So they're talking about sympathetic resonance here. They're already resonating here, right? But nobody wants to stay in this stasis point. So you as an artist, you're going to say, okay, well, let's just jump it up to this level. Oh, yeah, okay, I can relate to that because I've been here for a little while and now I'm going to come up to here. And that's why a lot of this psychospiritual work tends to be regurgitated,
Mm.
rather than inspired. A lot of people tend to think that their thoughts, when they're accessing the qualia for the first time in a realm that they hadn't previously dialed into, for them it's like inspired shit. No, this has been said for 15,000 years, but just in the language of the zeitgeist at the particular time. In the case of like the Abrahamic faiths, it was spoken of in the Bronze Age, right?
Sure.
It was a Bronze Age understanding of consciousness. Maybe it doesn't have as much resonance as it once did because human beings have been slowly moving up the evolutionary ladder and included in their lexicon of consciousness or self, psychology, neuroscience, biology. They have a lot more information now that, when we hear things that sound mythical to us or belief structure oriented, a lot of us go, hey, why would you believe that? It doesn't negate what was said, in my opinion. What was said was that qualia interpreted through the individuals at the time.
Right. So if you had interpreted that qualia, maybe perhaps at a different time in your life, you might interpret it completely differently if you
Right.
tapped into something like that.
Right. But to your question of,
Yeah.
can an individual tap into anything? Yeah, the answer is of course. mind is unlimited. Bob Monroe, in his genius, he at the end of his life, he said, to me, he said, I don't really go, and this is after he wrote his third book on the out of body experiences. I don't really go out of body in the same way that I once did. And I'm like, what the hell do you mean? You know, we're having hamburgers.
Yeah.
And he's telling me this. And I'm like, what do you mean? Because Bob and I were friends. He said, I look at this now as being consciousness on a spectrum that I'm thinking of in terms of phase relationship.
Huh.
And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, if you think of a 360 circle, and you and I are sitting here at 0 and 1 degree. Okay, you being 0, I'm not making you the 0. I'll be the 0.
I'll be nothing. I say I'm nothing. That's
you
fine.
like that place. Okay, so I'm going to
yeah.
put you in the 0. You're the 0, I'm 1. We're close enough in proximity on this protractor wheel, right, where we can resonate with one another and completely understand what's going on and agree that we are in this physical time space. This table exists, right? We can collectively agree on it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we can even talk about our experience of it. But if we went into various altered states, for instance, as I'm speaking to you, something I say triggers a memory or a thought or, well, I'll put that, let's say a personal memory or thought that existed within this particular lifetime. I'm still yammering on, right? Trying to get my point across or whatever we're discussing. But you're like listening to a Beatles song that you heard back in the 7th grade, and you're relating to the lyrics because something in your memory was triggered by something that I had said, right? I mean, people zone out of each other's conversations all the time. So back to the protractor spectrum. You went from 0 to 25 degrees. I'm still at 1.
I see.
All right? Different place in consciousness and space-time. When one goes into the hypnagogic state, you might consider that to be so close to the subconscious realm, even though it tends to be personal, that it would be 90 degrees out of phase with physical time-space. Why? You're almost asleep. Sensory input, right? And you're engaging only with what might be considered personal subconscious things, because what happens in early stages of the hypnagogic state is that threshold that we tend to, as our awareness goes from waking to sleep, we hit that threshold, and once we pass through the threshold, we're gone.
Yeah.
Lights out, nobody home, right? But if you're a practiced meditator who can remain aware and bring your consciousness down to that point where all of a sudden you're sitting on the threshold and maybe even applying a little pressure to the threshold and pushing it further down because thresholds are malleable. Now what happens is content begins to come up that you're becoming aware of that you had not been aware of before. Some people would call it hypnagogic imagery. I call it personal dream content.
Wow.
Not necessarily pure dream content because it's still very thought responsive, So this stuff comes up and I am having memories. I go from my linear thinking to all of a sudden there's a cat. What the hell's that cat doing? Oh, that's an interesting looking cat. Kind of reminds me, meanwhile, all of this is just, pulling me into a dream state. Right,
Yes.
where I would ordinarily lose consciousness for a little while, and then it would reemerge in REM sleep, right? With regards to, where was I going with this? With regards to
Hypnagogic state. You're talking about hypnagogic
yeah,
state.
but it had to do more with the experience of consciousness and the qualia and how we pull these things out. Content. That's where I was driving it. This is all personal content. What I'm teaching people to do is ride that wave, be able to discern the symbolism of their own personal content, right, and connect it to memories that they have in their lives, which helps work on belief structures, the shadow work, all that stuff.
Yeah.
And use that hypnagogic state as a springboard into that place where qualia exists. These are the packets of information that Carl Jung, I believe, referred to as archetypes. I have never had a conversation with Jung, so I could be off here. But from everything that I've read, he thought of archetypes as collective bits or packets of human longings, beliefs, all this qualia stuff that the quantum theorists are
Personified as an archetype.
Right, very anthropomorphized
Yes.
oftentimes. That's why the gods all appear to be,
Sure.
men.
I gotcha.
Except for the lady gods, those, but they're like demigods. It's always the ones
Really
who
about
are-
sex, too, and babies.
Well, there you go. Right, and duality and polarity structures. Right. The hypnagogic state, if one can maintain a sense of awareness, can bring somebody into those experiences, which tend to be more transcendent, i.e. the ego tends to relax to such a state where there's an I that can have the experience, but it's not tied to it. It's not personal yet. It's very impersonal. That's why my model of consciousness, to simplify things, is to keep it personal and impersonal. Both awareness and non-awareness. So when you ask me what is consciousness, it's kind of this and that in my way of thinking rather than this or that. So now we can get into a long conversation about non-duality.
You're kind of describing what they were doing with the remote viewing, how they were having one person slowly guide them into what they're
Exactly.
seeing. It's pretty much what you're doing, right?
Exactly.
Wow.
It's like remote viewing but I wouldn't call it remote viewing because it's not
I get it.
scientific
But how
remote
you're
viewing.
leading them through it, that's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, without any map coordinates, though.
Yeah.
Well,
But what I mean is that you're kind of leading them into a new way of seeing something that doesn't allow their self-consciousness to insert its own
create absolute meaning around it, right?
right.
It's like leave that meaning. Let's put a pin in that for a
Sure.
minute, Let's inquire more deeply. That is what I'm doing.
That's interesting.
That is what I'm doing, at least in stage 2, because there are 3 stages to the Triad Mind program. The first is to get people to be able to be proficient in exploring the hypnagogic state in both the personal and impersonal realm. The second stage is to walk them through that personal realm to the point where the schisms in the self are collapsed. So that shadow work is where the integration takes place, leads to the pinnacle of that triad, right? Where oneness is, where the connectivity is. That point, we invert the pyramid.
Sure.
And start creating, so you got a top-down process, and if you merge the two of it, it becomes that famous Mogan David or Star David symbol, right? Which is a balancing point of above and below.
Interesting.
In which case, now we start using consciousness and energy, or consciousness the energy of consciousness to affect reality, to affect an outcome that we are trying to use, rather than some master video game controller in the sky saying, you will say this now, you will do this now, which is fate versus free will type of thing.
Of course.
I think that's what we're moving into with regards to an Aquarian age. But it requires a sense of responsibility. I mean, you wrote a book called Becoming God.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
What were you referring to?
Oh, man. That this awakening process, you're awakening to the connection that you have with everything that you're perceiving. And as you're awakening to this perspective, it's sort of a refinement of self. But there's no end to the refinement. The refinement is forever. Even God is becoming God. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Forever. It's becoming more God through these dreams, but creating more dreams and more experiences. So it's kind of like this self-feeding transcendence that transcends up and includes the outer parts, and that uses the outer parts to push itself up.
Process of recursion.
Oh, of course,
right?
that too. Yeah.
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 through a black hole. I mean, it just keeps spinning itself out, right?
Sure.
And
Yeah.
expanding more and more as it got, and creating more depth. Yeah, the
Yeah.
Kabbalists have the very similar viewpoint. So, David Cooper, a Kabbalistic rabbi, wrote a book called God is a Verb.
God is a verb.
Yeah, I love that
I do like
notion.
that. That's great.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
it's true.
It's true.
It's
Yeah.
true. It's a being and becoming.
Yeah.
It's not a being or becoming, right? It's both.
It's just becoming. It's
That's
it's
right.
movement. It's, I guess, or something. And you can't say it's growth because it already is everything. It's just a deeper self-realization of itself, a
Right.
deeper understanding of itself, I
Right.
guess,
Right.
forever. And it will do it forever.
Right.
Yeah.
So are you.
And so am I. Yeah.
So are you.
Sure.
And, theoretically, from one lifetime to the next lifetime, or parallel lives, however you like to look at that, you're always evolving into something new. And in order to do that, there has a beginning, middle, and end point, so that you can come through the circle of nothingness again, right?
Yeah.
And do it all over again,
Yeah.
like a donut.
And in a sense, it's kind of like the Maxwell's function of the wave is what you're describing,
Exactly.
right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
369.
Right. Oh, we can go down that rabbit hole if you want. But back to the CIA document for just a quick moment. That was the essence of what Bob wanted to do with consciousness, rather than get people hooked on this idea of the out-of-body experience. He didn't go out of body the way that he used to, is what he told me.
Ah.
What do you mean? Well, again, that phasing spectrum. You get to that hypnagogic place at 90 degrees, and you start exploring the depth of that, right? So you're 180 degrees out of phase with physical time space. Where's consciousness now? It's not completely focused on what's going on in the physical dynamic, right? Your sleeping body might be observed by somebody who's in the room, but you're not interacting with them.
Mm-mm.
You're interacting with your personal dream state.
Sure.
Or you might be in a state of stasis where there's no conscious or awareness, right?
There's
For a
just
while.
observing.
Going further and further into that springboard that I was talking about, into the superconscious, you reach a point of 359. Now the archetypes will find themselves, and the content, if you can maintain awareness in that state, that deep state of meditation, is totally unattached to physical sensory input. Now it is strictly picking up information from etheric, quote unquote, sources, right? Ironically, strangely, they're very impersonal. They're more archetypal. Simultaneously, they have a resonance with your personal being. And that resonance changes, I want to say changes you through adaptation. Your recognition of those archetypes as they exist within your personal psyche, and psyche meaning soul, not necessarily, psychology, like attracts like. You become a part of that. That energy becomes a part of you. That creates a growth structure. And that growth structure is what it's really all about. As far as I can tell, what's the purpose of consciousness? Growth, evolution. That's the best that I can come up with.
Wow. It's a lot.
It is a
It's
lot, but
heavy
I don't know
stuff.
what the hell I'm talking about. I'm just some schmuck you found out on the street. You wanted to pull a podcast.
Hardly a schmuck.
Right, yeah.
Let's talk about some juicy stuff. Let's talk about magic.
This wasn't juicy?
Oh no, we're gonna get real juicy.
Oh,
We're gonna get
jeez.
juicy.
What do I know about magic?
Let's talk about magic.
What do you want to talk about?
Sympathetic resonance, magic. Is it being used on us?
I would say through influence, yeah. Through
Yeah.
information. But I don't really think, how do we define magic?
It's a good question. I guess
Like a cell phone. Back in the Bronze Age, if you could time travel,
that would be like magic.
it'd be like magic.
I would
right?
just say that as a culture and as an individual, are we being Are we moving as a result of magic? As in, are we being moved as a piece on the board when we're not aware?
I mean, kind of like what Tom Campbell was referring
Yeah,
to
I
with
guess
the
so.
video
Yeah,
game.
yeah.
But that was in his theory, that's a higher self,
Mm,
right? So that's a interdimensional aspect of you, meaning that it's outside of 3D plus one, height, width, depth plus time, right?
yeah.
It's in the fifth dimensional realm, so to speak, and you exist there too. And that is moving you or trying to inform you, some people refer to it as like a higher self that has a greater perspective. That may be making it into a guardian angel of sorts. I'm not sure that's really the best name for it.
So I get the feeling that you're holding back. That you know some things that you're not really. Some things leak out every now and then, and I'm just like, all right, what's up? What's up?
Holding back, you mean with regards to like I'm holding some secret Illuminati wisdom that I'm not willing to
Yeah,
share?
is that true?
That's what YouTube is curating in your feed, right? With regards to the CIA document. Yeah, yeah. I know enough. I know a lot of shit. I know a lot of shit. No, I don't know
I
the
know
damn
there's
thing.
things that you can't talk about too. So let's talk about.
No, there are plenty of things that I can talk about. What were you going to say?
Also, let's talk about magic. I think we got into a little bit of a conversation about that the other day, and I was like, "Oh, save it for the podcast." So
Right, right.
let's get into that.
Let's talk about magic. All right. So, what is magic really?
I would say it's just fractality. It's you do something, you do enough patterns, repeating patterns that somehow that creates an inertia for this fractal response. That's the best way I could describe it.
I mean,
Spells
you
are
know some
incanted.
shit that I don't know. Then.
I and I'm only guessing. I wouldn't call myself a magician, and I don't practice magic, so
Right.
I'm a novice. But it seems to me that a lot of what we're doing with the music is a form of magic, right?
I think so many things. I think magic, first of all, is relative,
Sure.
meaning it's time dependent. You know, like what we were talking about at another point in time with regards to cell phones. If you could time travel back to the Bronze Age and you had a cell reception, right, and show somebody a YouTube video from the future, they would think that you were some sort of wizard or magician. So magic has a supernatural or preternatural type of feeling to it. But I was having a conversation with your buddy Mike about who's a guitar player. And I said, so Mike, when you're playing the guitar and you are in the zone, I asked him who his influences were, and he disclosed that. And I said, and you're playing, and you know that what you're playing is not influenced or informed by your predecessors whose work you admired, nor is it informed by your calisthenic techniques and muscle memory, and you play something that feels inspired and different. How do you know where that's coming from? What is that? Because it feels like magic, right? Inspiration feels like magic. And it's not just on a personal level. It can be felt by others who are witnessing it. And Mike admitted to me that when he's in the studio and he's all alone, he gets in that zone and nexus, and he performs something that he knows is magic coming out of him, informed by neither calisthenics nor his influences, he can maintain that state of flow and will. But when he does it on stage, there's an observer or a bunch of observers that when he gets into that nexus, all of a sudden he'll get out of it.
Mm.
Now, there's a million different reasons why that could be. One being, as Mike theorized, was the observer phenomenon and its impact on the flow state or the will state. Whereas in the studio, there's no observer, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Unless
Yeah.
there are a bunch of hoobies
That's so
hanging out,
funny. Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So that magic is multidimensional. in my way of thinking. It is a combination of flow, which might be considered a more feminine or receptive or open type of consciousness, right? If we're to talk about archetypes.
Yeah.
And a combination of that and will, through intention. And I asked Mike, so what does that feel like for you? You've got this, and he described it as, even spoke of it as multidimensional in terms of it being layers of, we'll call it stuff, qualia, things that are in existence. And I'm paraphrasing him there, moving in direct current with his willpower, right?
Mm-hmm.
So intention plays a part in magic. Flow also plays a part in magic. So in the world of Kabbalah, I like Kabbalah, I've been studying it for a long time. There is the crown at the Tree of Life called Keter, which is best described as the first celestial swirlings of something appearing out of nothing. Okay. It's called the crown. Keter meaning crown in Hebrew. From that point, you have three pillars, one going from Keter to Malkut, which is the ground, right? Well, it's also referred to as the kingdom, and two side pillars, which are connected from Keter to, you've seen this glyph. If
Yeah,
not,
of course.
show your,
Tree of Life. Yeah.
And these two spheres here are referred to as Chokmah and Binah. Binah being that at the crown, the tip or the pinnacle of the left-hand path, and Chokmah, meaning wisdom, being at the pinnacle of the right-hand path. Chokmah being a positive or male-oriented source point of energy, cohesion energy. Binah being feminine, having a line between the two of them, meeting to create what's called the supernal triangle, is a receptivity point. So the implications there of Mike's description of magic when it's experienced for him personally, and it is a felt sense of something, and this felt sense, right?
Yeah.
I think everybody does.
Yeah.
I think everybody does. So everybody experiences magic. We just don't know what it truly is. I see it as being a combination of a balance point between that source point of first celestial swirlings and inspiration contained into this thing called wisdom, directed into this flow state. So it's a relationship between the three that work together, then get filtered down through the other sferot, or spheres, or containers, or vessels, if you right, of the Tree of Life, which are psychospiritual in nature. Magic, as practiced by people who are involved in Wicca or voodoo or psychic healing or the hologram, and what's put out in that CIA document in terms of the interface between the field of quantum potential and directed willed focus, are, it's a balancing point. And that is why that center pillar is referred to in the Tree of Life as the pillar of consciousness, the pillar of mildness. So if you think about it in terms of electrical flow, it's neutral, nothingness, to positive and negative. You need all three to work together to complete the circuit.
I see.
And in Kabbalah, it's spoken about as force, form, balance, force, form, balance, force, form, balance, as it goes down the Tree of Life. So all manifestation begins with the first celestial swirlings of nothingness into a somethingness, and then is directed through force, created into form, and neutralized or brought to ground through the center pillar of consciousness, which is experience. So that's speaking about magic in terms of Cabalistic wisdom.
Is that would be like I don't want to say inspiration, but like a calling, like you get this kind of feeling like you want to be doing something. Would that be the first one?
Yeah, it could certainly be there, but I'd have to ask, what is that calling?
Yeah, good question.
Where
Yeah.
does it come from? It's like asking the question, all right, if you've ever gotten to the point of meditation, a lot of people get, when they tell them, I teach meditation, the first thing they'll tell me is, I really tried to do that, but I, try to clear my thoughts and I can't do it. And it frustrates the hell out of me. That clearing of the thought is an exercise
Yeah.
to be observing the thoughts, to take an observer standpoint, not be
Not be
your
the thought.
Right. You are not, or feed it, engage it, because we indulge ourselves. We indulge our own thinking, right? And there are emotions attached to it.
Absolutely.
And both of those, thought and emotion, live on the tree of life at the very lowest points of the pillars called netzach, being emotion, means glory, and hod, which means has several means. It could mean reverberation, and thoughts reverberating. It could also mean I have to go back to my Hebrew to get all the different names for it. But the basic essence has more to do with logic, and that's why in magical traditions there are two paths that are followed. One is called the Hermetic path, which is on the left-hand pillar, which comes from philosophical study, discipline, reading, applied logic, mathematics. All of those things are very strong rituals done in a very hermetical type of way. You can't study, in a study group as effectively as you can study alone, right, through reading a book and ingesting. Or the Orphic path, which is on the right-hand tree, part of the tree of life, which has to do with more like Dionysian rituals, orgiastic ritual, dancing in the moonlight, and nakedness, letting that energy
Mark,
just...
You really know how to party.
Yeah, really, exactly. Having, all in a process, all in an attempt to build up an energy that can be focused and directed through somebody who's in charge of the ritual in order to affect an outcome. So those might be called, in the current era of thinking, or at least in my current way of thinking, means of tying in consciousness from an emotional and logical standpoint, because it's not an either or. In that CIA document, once again, the idea was to try to use consciousness in a way that could affect an outcome. The idea being that consciousness is essentially vibrational. So with enough focus and intention, I could affect the molecules in the air, let's say, or the ethers.
So I kind of kill somebody with my mind.
Kill somebody with my mind, or create an apple out of
Thin air.
nothingness, right? Or change water into wine.
Sure.
Or you getting so all of these things.
This is a perfect place for you to talk about your Apple story, just so you know.
I think I did last time,
but not on this podcast.
Okay.
I love this story.
Well, no, I was playing with this.
Okay.
All right.
I got ahead of it. I'm sorry.
Because
I stole your thunder.
There's something to do. This stuff does work.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of mystery to it, and that I'm trying to approach from a relatively scientific, or at least, not jumping on some philosophical bandwagon that makes me a this or a that.
I'll be the wonky one. You be the scientist. I'll be the wonky one.
Okay, you be the wonky one. So this is what happened, Ms. Wonk. I was at the lab at the Institute, and I was sitting there trying to focus on manifesting an apple. And the reason I chose an apple is because it's pretty innocuous, right?
Sure.
I'm not trying to hurt anybody.
No attachment to it.
Right. And if I managed to do it, it'd be like, oh, this is interesting.
And quite profound if you really think about the profundity of the fractal
really
nature
with
of that.
regards to the tree of knowledge of good. Right. Exactly. So I'm in there and I'm doing this work, and naturally, I'm in an altered state of consciousness, and I'm trying to feel the apple in my hand, and I see it. I'm engaging all of my senses, so that, and I do have a decent sense of synesthesia, so I can see colors and hear the sound of the apple if I want to. It's all this integration. I came out of this work and nothing happened. No apple. So it's lunchtime and I'm hungry because I've been thinking about apples for the past hour. I'm now hungry, so I go to the local eatery and I pull into the parking lot, and this is 5 minutes. And it's a short drive from the Institute's lab. So 5 minutes pass. I pull into the parking lot, and what pulls in right next to me but an apple truck, a truck full of crates of apples. Now, that is an unusual synchronicity, right? And I'm thinking to myself, surely this is a coincidence or a meaningful coincidence, synchronicity, that, is connected to what I was just doing. But, I didn't manifest this apple, right? I could delude myself into believing that if I wanted to. Ooh, you made this apple truck. No, apple truck pulled in. Guy's a totally separate entity. He's not bending to my will, right? But what was really interesting was that I looked at him and I'm laughing to myself because I know what I just did. And I said, got an awful lot of apples there, because the driver was there. And he said, yep, sure do. Want one? And he threw it at me. Right?
And you,
I grabbed it in that hand that I was working. Now I'm looking at a manifestation of an apple that came out of nowhere.
but it had to come through the
But
dream.
it had to come through what was referred to in that document as the hologram.
Mm.
Jung made this observation that there are physical manifestations of thought, and he referred to it as synchronicity. I think that is a beautiful word
Yeah,
for it,
I love that word.
because of the word sync,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yes.
Everything's in synchronous formation, right?
Yeah.
And having to do with time. Synchronize something, it happens in time, right? Every band members playing together, they're all running to the same tempo and rhythm. I don't know what the mystery of collapsing time is, but I do know that consciousness does have that ability because of that spectrum that Bob Monroe was referring to earlier. It could be, and this is theoretical and not scientific, that if you can move your consciousness from the here and now into a projection that is 359 degrees out of phase with the here and now, so you're in an altered state of consciousness, but you're in that flow state, all right? But at the same time, not losing your ability to direct and will within that flow state. You're extracting information and directing that information in such a way that's cohesive and narrow banded, that when you return to time, here and now, back to point zero, timeline zero, that may be the way that time has collapsed, like in my experience. Now, I was trying to create an apple out of nothing, right, through using my mind, but that didn't happen. What happened was a physical manifestation of another human being who had nothing to do with my little demented experiment, came and fulfilled a function. I don't know how that happened. I don't have the grandiose wisdom to ever be able to, fully understand the mechanics of all that. All I can report is it happened, and I'm fascinated by it. And it proves to me, those two examples, Mike's example of playing guitar, or your example of being in the flow and directing that through producing music, has a reverberant effect. That's the word for Hod. Reverberation, splendor is
Mm-hmm.
another word for it.
It's a nice word.
Yeah, they have not just a nice ring to it, they evoke a potential. You have to start
Yeah.
thinking about, what is splendor? what is this
Yeah,
reverberation?
like coming forth, it has that kind of feeling of,
Right.
yeah,
That's why I love the
manifestation, almost in the word. Yeah.
exactly, exactly.
You can also argue that,
Excuse me.
and I've kind of like I tell my audience, I've moved a lot way past the multiverse now. I see it mostly as a mental construct, as a way to conceptualize spirituality, if you will. But you could say that there are an infinitude of marks who, some of them were focused on the apple, some of them did something completely different that day.
Hmm.
But the mark that looked at the apple during your session, and you went to the lunch later that day, there's a mark that went to a different restaurant. There's a mark that went to the restaurant, and the apple truck didn't come
Yeah,
there.
absolutely.
But you chose somehow through that intention, chose the reality of the mark that was in that restaurant when that truck came. In other words, the dream,
Coincidence,
yeah, coincidence. Well,
right?
Young
Meaning
Young
that you
would
have
say everything's coincidence.
incidental
Yeah,
points meeting somewhere.
yes, through
Right,
intention.
right.
And there's like through the multiverse, you can kind of see the action of it coming together. Not that I say that that's is the way that it is. It's just a way to kind of conceptualize the law of attraction, I guess would be the way to say this, of attracting the universe of the Mark that got the apple versus attracting the universe that Mark didn't get the apple.
Well, think about it in terms of the Higgs boson.
Or sympathetic resonance even
Right.
too. Yeah.
Well, yeah,
Yeah.
that goes to your
Yeah.
question about can you access the qualia? Yeah,
Yeah.
if you resonate with a particular qualia, that will come to you in the same way that the AI algorithms are paying attention to what you are reacting to.
Mm,
I like this. Okay, I'll feed you more.
right.
Right. And
Yeah.
before you know it, you're going down a rabbit hole of information flow
Yeah.
that is curated by an intelligence outside of your own, but is affecting your intelligence. All this information that is curated to you through information flows, packets of information, different people's YouTube channels, are oriented towards a particular theme which you seem to be grappling for. And you indicate to that. So it's along those lines.
Mm,
It's very much along those lines.
yeah.
So, can magic be used to influence another person's thinking? I say, yeah.
Yeah. Would be like a
It's being
voodoo
done.
doll
I
or
mean, it's
whatever. Yeah.
self-evident at this point.
So are they creating that for themselves because through their focus, let's say there's a voodoo doll or something like that, the person's recognition that there was this spell put on them,
Mm.
are they creating that through themselves? Their own fear
That's
of what's going to
self-fulfilling
happen
prophecy.
is what's attracting their where they're going in that multiverse.
That would be a very good way to look at it.
Yeah.
Another way to look at it is through the kinesthetic sense. If you don't know what that is, kinesiology is energy having a physical effect. A bomb
Sure.
is kinetic energy having a physical effect, blowing buildings to hell, right?
Sure.
All right. We have a kinesthetic sense. We tend to think of our 5 physical senses as our only senses. Well, what about your sense of balance? Is that a physical sense? Where does your sense of balance come from? And some people would say it might originate at the olivary nuclei, or say the limbic system.
Hmm.
Because it seems to be correlated with our hearing. We lose our balance when we have a clogged ear or something like
Yeah.
that, or just one particular, a sense of aesthetics, a sense of symmetry. All of these things are senses, but they're very ephemeral senses, right?
Yeah.
Same with the kinesthetic sense. The difference between the kinesthetic sense and, say, a sense of balance is, if I'm seated, I'm obviously fairly balanced, but my kinesthetic sense will allow me to reach over, grab this glass, and never lose eye contact with you, and be able to put it back on the coaster, right?
Yeah.
It's a sense of feeling. It's a sense of movement. It is my energy moving through my nervous system that allows me to operate in the world of action. Think about the way thoughts and feelings affect your kinesthetic sense. Now, if my intention is to reach over and grab that glass without losing eye contact on you, right? I can kind of feel my way around and use that energy that allows me to move my physical body to accomplish that task. If somebody informs me, scares me in this moment, right? And just, loud bang
Sure.
outside of the room, and, what the hell is that? My life is threatened. My ability to perform that simple action won't be as narrowly focused, right? One example. We also feel emotion in our physical bodies. When that bang occurs, where do people tend to feel fear in their bodies?
Oh, I guess their stomach, their heart, or what?
Right,
Yeah.
right here in the solar plexus,
Like
right?
you've been kicked. Yeah.
Why is that so ubiquitous?
Yeah.
But it's there.
Yeah.
Now, the Hindu philosophy talks about it in terms of chakra,
Right.
and that being a power chakra or just the low heart chakra. And there's a lot of argument and discussion around these things,
Sure.
But bottom line is it's a felt sense of something. So I like to think of the kinesthetic sense as a felt sense that can be felt in the body that is not necessarily tied to logic or will. It is influenced as well as it can be directed through will. The greatest thing that I managed to accomplish through calisthenic practice and imagination, flow and force, right? Or willpower, and, because it takes will to do calisthenic practice, was to be able to walk on the fretboard and know what note I can reach at this point. I can now hear the melody in my head and get to the note where I want to get to without having to futz around trying to figure finding that note. I haven't perfected it yet, but that was a milestone in my playing to be able to do that. That's a combination of that triad that I was talking about. And that's why I refer to my work as the Triad Mind, because this, to me, mind is a multidimensional, three-phase, and I'm just making a model easy here, three-phase model of existence. One being conscious, which you're present with here in the here and now, knowing full well that there's subconscious activity that is continually informing my perceptions of my conscious awareness of what's occurring here and now. In other words, there's always some level of transference. My job is to do enough of my personal work to know that that transference is there. It has potential to inform the current moment. And if I'm skillful in my shadow work and integrate it well, I not only know that, I'm aware of how it can be indicated in my body as I'm present with the here and now, which allows me to allow the subconscious to become conscious in the here and now without having to go into an altered state of consciousness. Same applies to the superconscious, that archetypal world of information flow, that place where the qualia lives, that place before inspiration, that place that is informing our thinking before we can actually formulate the thought.
Yeah.
What I'm saying? Have you ever been in a meditation state where you reach that point of stillness and blackness and void, right? And then another thought comes in, right?
Sure. You put it
And
away.
you can do the little detachment, My mantra used to be, I seem to be thinking about X, oh well, peace, and peace was the recentering point. And I'd think about nothing for a while, and then something would come.
Sure.
After I became proficient about that, I became very interested in what's occurring just before that thought enters in. What is the stimulus for that thought? What is the stimulus for that emotion? Some of it, well, I haven't landed yet as to what that is, but the curiosity reminds me of that first swirlings in Keter.
Oh, yeah, totally.
Because in Kabbalah, Keter is only a manifestation of a three-level process that lives behind Keter. So think of a mirror, right? Which is a piece of glass that has a reflection, but a black surface on the back, right? If you look at the back, it's nothing. In Cabalistic theory or lore, there are three levels of non existence called ein, nothing, becoming something, which then limitless something, meaning potential, which manifests itself as light. And that light is that reflection of light, manifestation of light, is what they propose Keter is. So think about that in terms of consciousness and what we were talking about with that void of nothingness. You reach that void of nothingness, but voids don't like being voids, apparently.
No.
They like limitlessness, potential.
Yeah.
Hence the introduction of light.
Okay.
It's light being thought. Did you want to interject something there?
No. I'm just listening. I was gonna ask, is that that inspiration for that light? Let's just say that Keter.
Mm-hmm.
Is that boredom?
Great question. I don't know.
I mean, how long can you be in a void before you get bored? Because if you're in a void, it's timeless. That moment could be infinite.
Paradise could be considered boring.
Definitely, for sure.
To some.
For sure, absolutely.
Right? Bob Monroe, back to my buddy here, one of his last experiences that he shared with the world in his last book was that he got to go home. He realized that in his hero's journey, so much of his experiences in and out of body were oriented towards the desire for the return. Joseph Campbell did a beautiful job. Return to what? Return to home. With what? Knowledge of something that wasn't available.
Sure.
From in that point of origin.
Ah.
What would that be? Experience, right? Experience of
I see where
duality.
you're going,
Okay.
yeah.
So, I mean, all these things that Campbell spoke of and that Bob Monroe spoke of are well-trodden paths. They've been around for a long time. So in this experience, he's in what he considered to be, I don't know, something along the lines of the Elysian Fields. He called it a park.
Okay.
Right? And he's just basking in the return. I'm home, right?
Yeah.
His guides took him home. And he's basking in this return. And as he's lying there and he's watching, picture perfect clouds moving in formation and this incredible ethereal music that he'd never heard before, but was just stimulating his senses and just putting him in a state of ecstatic bliss. At a certain point, something didn't feel right to him. And he became curious about that. I'm in paradise. Why shouldn't I feel perfect? And then he noticed the clouds were a repetitive pattern, like on an endless loop of perfection. And the music also was on an endless loop of absolute perfection, undisturbed by any form of chaos or uncertainty or just, basic existential angst that people go through being human beings, unknown. And he sat because it was all known. It was predetermined. It was just perfect. And he said, Bob never cursed, ever. When he told me this story, he said, and I realized this, and I went, oh, shit. Well, going back to the Garden of Eden, that's the way it works. You're in a state of complete bliss, a complete connectivity to all things, in total harmony. It could be that boredom is one of the reasons we wanted to eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, to use that mythology. Good and evil being the primal duality. This is great. This sucks. Pleasure,
Yeah.
pain, blah, 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 all that Freudian discovery. What Jung understood was that there was a third option between those two dualities on the side pillars of the tree of life. And that was this neutral pattern. And that neutral pattern has the ability to ground the force and form in an electrical circuit. The positive and negative charge
Wow.
requires the neutral. And that's what the magic of synchronicity is. So, do I know shit? Yeah, I know shit, but is this important stuff? You guys tell me.
I
This
mean,
is the root of psychospiritual explorations through, part of it can take place in an altered state. But if you do not ground those altered states and the consciousness there, you go into pitfalls of delusion, self-aggrandizement, thinking you're somehow different or special. That informs narcissism, and I mean narcissism in the best sense. Narcissus having the pool reflect back to him his
yes,
virtuous
yes.
qualities, and he was so enamored with his beauty, he stayed there through time.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what narcissism is. That's everyday narcissism. Everybody is doing that. Talking about the ego.
Yeah.
It's what informs the ego. We want to see the best parts of ourselves, but not the parts of ourselves that are lying in the shadows. Those are the bad guys. And that's the ego. And, blah, 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 yada, yada, yada. You're very, very human. My work, hopefully, is designed to be able to integrate all of that and put it into practical application. I don't know that practical application will be the manifestation of an apple out of thin air, but I don't think it's so far away that it would be any different from you manifesting a song out of thin air with the proper tools. Consciousness has to play a part of it, will has to play a part in it, flow has to play a part in it, and it's a very integrated process.
A delicate balance between them.
Exactly,
Yeah.
because one will throw you out of the other state, right?
Yeah.
Over rationalize, you don't feel the emotions. Over emotional, you lose all the logic.
Yeah.
It's force, flow, balance. So if there's some shit that you want to know, that's the shit. That's the shit right there.
Well, Mark, I could talk with you forever, and we often do talk forever.
I am a talkative guy.
I would love to have you come back on here. Will you come back on here and talk again?
We've been having this conversation.
I mean,
for
you're going to
15
talk with me
years.
regardless. Would you mind if I put the cameras on one more time?
Yeah, if these people want to hear what we're saying, then I feel bad for all of you.
No, they're going to be enthralled. I believe.
No,
believe
I'm
me.
teasing.
Yes.
It's the best journey you can possibly be on.
Absolutely.
It is literally a hero's journey. It's the quintessence, and you are the hero/heroine in the story, and there is a protagonist in the story, and an antagonist in the story, which is the same antagonist that all of the great avatars of our age have been through. Jesus doing his desert walk, the Buddha confronting the Mara under the Bodhi tree, same principles. How do you know these things are true? And I love the Buddha's response. He just pointed to the ground. Because I'm here.
Because I'm
It's self-evident.
Yes.
Yeah. Of course I'll come back. Anytime
Awesome.
you like.
I'd love to have that.
Maybe another time we could do it live and people can, throw in their own conversations.
Yes, I would
don't
love
know, you have that ability.
We can do that too. Yeah, absolutely. But we'll definitely do that next time. So get your cameras ready, get your questions ready, and we'll have Mark back on here very, very soon, and we'll do this again, and we'll go even deeper. I got to prepare more questions. He ran through my 10 questions in the first 30 minutes. I was just like, okay, well, there's all my questions.
Sorry about that.
No, it was great. It was great.
Well,
Great.
next time I'm going to ask you questions. I know you talk about this
They
stuff.
already know it, I think.
Yeah, but now they know what the two of us think. Do you think they're any more interested or less interested?
I think they'll dig it. I think they'll dig it.
Do you think it'll stop the flow of the curation about me knowing stuff that I'm not willing to talk about?
No, not
Because
at
we
all.
didn't even talk about sympathetic resonance and binaural beats and
I
all that
know
stuff.
we didn't get down to it. Well, do you want to talk? We have. Let's see.
I don't want to talk anymore. I'm tired. You
Yeah,
talk.
I get it. Yeah, let's kill it here. But we'll come back and we'll talk about sympathetic resonance and we'll get into all that stuff because that's
Sure.
a whole rabbit hole in itself, and that's really a lot.
It is, but
Yeah,
in the meantime, study your Kabbalah at home.
very good.
And don't get into practicing until you got it all figured out.
Yeah, leave the red string off for a little bit.
The red string or, whatever else you're going to do. Because, as you probably know, there were, the whole school of Kabbalah in the Western esoteric tradition, centered around Aleister Crowley's work, which was an offshoot of Eliphas Levy's work. And, it doesn't end up well if, in fact, you aren't well integrated and grounded.
Yeah,
Kabbalah is a study in psychology of self, and as much which is part of the Lurianic tradition and the Toledano tradition, that is, just as important, if not more important,
well, we have to get
than
into that. That's like
magic and ritual.
that's deep. We can't throw something that heavy on them in the last 5 minutes of this thing. We have
Yeah, but you got to give them a
to.
cliffhanger. Right?
Where can they find you? Tell everybody where we can find you, and tell them
Right
about.
here, when I'm
Yeah.
not hanging out with this guy, I'm working on my website at thetriadmind.com. That's www.thetriadmind.com. On there, you'll find a couple of different levels of membership, and you can join depending on your interests in meditation. And the program that I was referring to, the Triad Mind program, is a three-stage program. The first part of it lives on the site, is done through streaming, can be done on home as home study. It's an exploration into the hypnagogic state for the purposes of exploring subconscious and superconscious content, and the integration begins. I call that program foundational. It's also referred to as Cornerstone, that program. The second program is in production now. That's why you never see me. It's because I had to do a bunch of research
Even
having
at
to do with
night.
lucid dreaming. So I'll be teaching lucid dreaming techniques that will enable an ability to get beyond hypnagogic imagery and into what I can only refer to as the pure land of dream
Ooh,
content. But you're aware. You're not,
sure.
you're not going with the flow of your dream. You
You're
begin that way and then become lucid and become a master in a thought responsive environment. Reason that I want to get involved in lucid dreaming, or did get involved, is because that's really what drew me to all of this meditation to begin with. My lucid dreams.
yeah.
I wanted to understand them. They have that kind of pure land content or connectivity with that content, where your conscious mind is active and engaged, is incredibly powerful for resolving what psychologists, and I'm not a therapist, so don't confuse me with somebody who knows what they're talking about here, but from my understanding, the complexes, the fear complexes that we that are unavailable to us because they're so deep in our subconscious and they are resolved in our dream state theoretically. When you can come in contact with those things or any of that content, for some reason disappears.
Hmm.
I don't know why. I don't know why, but I've heard enough about other people's research to know that it's true, and my personal experience says the same. So who doesn't want to be, living without fear?
Right. Of course.
Stage two also deals much more with the archetypal and superconscious. So there's a transcendent quality, but what I'm trying to do, is resolve and collapse the duality that exists within us between the shadow self and the golden shadow self, that sort of thing, through the use of archetypes. But it's not meditation journeys where I'm invoking the archetypes outright. It's a very backdoor type of approach where you are the protagonist in the journey and you're not necessarily seeing these archetypes. Their energies are present. And then we can talk about, how that can be in our next conversation because it has to do with form and the combination of cymatics and vibration and all those other things. But it's
Mark,
intense, and stage 3 is coming out. So www.thetriadmind.com is where you find me. And in a bunch of podcasts, because I'm always having these interviews.
once again, my mind is blown. Yes, just relive me. Blown mind.
Your mind isn't blown. I'm a tour guide, you know that.
He's a very good tour guide. Very good tour
I've
guide.
been on a tour numerous times. I've been giving tours my whole life. I know a few things.
We're about to go take a tour of a very nice restaurant, and we're about to take a tour of the menu over there.
Good.
And are you down? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Do they have
Awesome.
apple pie?
We'll make sure of it.
No, I don't want apples.
All right. Thank you guys for turning in, and thank you, Mark, for coming and spending time with us and sharing. And we're definitely gonna have you back again.
Love the conversation.
Awesome.
And you're brilliant. We need to. Yeah.
I'm just posing.
Yeah, we're both in the humility world. Okay.
Thank you guys
Ciao.
very much. Have a good night. Bye bye.